We want to turn to another critically important issue, another one kind of like what's happening in Turkey that unfortunately flying under the radar a little bit, and that is Sudan, the ongoing conflict there. Many, many different things happening. And as always, we are honored to be joined by Mosaab Baba, who is a researcher on Sudan. Mosaab, thanks so much for joining us again.
Thanks, Eugene. Thanks, Rania. Nice to be with you guys again.
Great to have you with us. A lot of talk going on now. The Sudanese Armed Forces, one of the factions here, has just, I guess, more or less retaken Khartoum, the historical capital of Sudan, which obviously is a big milestone in many ways. But, I'm sort of seeing two sides of it, Mosaab, in terms of the conversation. Obviously, some saying this portends maybe sort of the death knell of the RSF, and it'll only be a slide down from here. Other side, I see a lot of people talking about the potential for a frozen conflict in a Libya type scenario. Where do you think it leaves us now with SAF having taken Khartoum?
So with SAF taking Khartoum right now, I mean, the tide started turning in late last year, where two factors, SAF started getting more support, from Turkey, from Iran. Egypt started becoming a little bit, more active. And on the other hand, the RSF from the beginning was an unsustainable project. The being a militia and relying on rule by fear and ethnic cleansing and stuff like that. So, and also the ethnic outnumbering of the RSF as well was another factor. So what happened, we can't talk about the future scenario without talking about something major that happened recently. Like our comrade Booker from Kenya was talking in one of your previous interviews. Basically, Nairobi hosted a parallel government formation by the RSF. So this is a significant event because it wasn't just the RSF and just small parties around it. It included some heavy hitters, like the SPLM North, and these guys who were saying basically, that the with SAF coming in and coming back, it's actually the NCP and the Bashir era Islamists that are coming back right now to power, which is actually true. We've seen recently with the celebrations in Khartoum, we've seen some high level NCP officials, wearing army fatigue and celebrating and going and taking over their previous headquarters and stuff like that. So the Libya scenario has actually escalated recently with the formation of this parallel government, which would cover most of the Darfur states and as well as Kurdufan and Blue Nile. And this also, we don't have any solid proof for this, but we think that the Trump administration coming in, the Biden administration had some kind of symbolic, pressure on the UAE, but now it seems like the UAE has, a green light to actually not only and re-up the RSF's resources and battle capability, but also to make political moves, like going in and trying to now bring in South Sudan to their fold as well. So it's not going to, it's going to be more of an escalation in the region more than it is a stalemate, unfortunately. And with this parallel government being formed, there's also the sense that Burhan and the NCP and the guys around SAF would be okay with another split in the country. South Sudan split off in 2011 from the Bashir regime. So now it's kind of the same leadership that would say, okay, if the RSF and the SPLM North and these guys want to take Darfur and Kurdufan, that's fine. And of course, Egypt is also kind of backing SAF, and they wouldn't have a problem either because that separation would include the countries that are along the Nile, along the Blue Nile and the White Nile. And that's really the main thing that Egypt is caring about as far as maintaining control over those regions. So it's still a little bit early to tell what's going to happen after this clear trajectory of taking over SAF taking over Khartoum and taking over Jazeera. But it's still kind of a little bit unknown as far as how this is going to happen, because also there are some talks here and there about now the possibility of negotiations now that there's clearly demarcated state lines as far as control between SAF and RSF, they can now come to the negotiation table and maybe they do just a power split, which would completely kill, of course, like the revolutionary movement that happened in 2019 and the removal of Bashir and everything, and it would bring us back to square one, basically, where you have a Bashir style government only split into two.
I know I always bring it back to this every time we talk to you, but I can't help but ask because it seems to have gotten even, more intense with regard to the war in Sudan. But can you talk a little bit about the role of outside regional actors, in particular Egypt and the UAE, which, while in the region of the Middle East, they do typically act on the same side, typically. In Sudan, it's not quite the case. And in fact, Egypt and the UAE, there's more splinters happening or taking place in the Middle East between them these days as well with regard to what's happening in Gaza. But anyways, I'm curious if you could kind of walk us through the outside forces and where they stand now as these developments take place in Sudan.
So it's still more or less the same.
Mm.
Egypt is primarily backing the SAF, and UAE backing the RSF. Both of them have economic interests with both sides. There's the gold trade, there's livestock, there's these huge resources that are being siphoned out into both of these countries. So Egypt and UAE, they can keep a cordial relationship between them. They even have some investment relationships and everything. But because they don't really care like how many people in Sudan are killed or whether they go to war or anything, because they're looking out for their interests in the country. They're, the with Egypt, as long as they secure the states that are along the Nile, to them they don't care about what happens in the rest of Sudan. And the UAE, they know they have a strong foothold with the RSF and in Darfur and everything. And if they are able to expand to South Sudan and have that kind of relationship, then that's a huge amount of resources as well, including oil, including gold. So with them, it's kind of they're looking at it as, it's like an MMA fight inside of Sudan. It's like who can duke it out, and everybody goes back to their corner and keeps their flow of resources. But of course, with the UAE, it's other things, like the Yemen war has been winding down and everything. So you see Saudi Arabia, for example, coming in, stepping up and giving more aid and everything because they don't want that connection to be broken either. And Saudi Arabia, they have a relationship with the RSF, but they're more leaning towards SAF. You have other actors that are more interested in propping up the theocratic rule in Sudan. So you have Turkey, you have to a certain extent, you have Iran. They're pretty much looking at the NCP and the Bashir era theocratic rule as their allies in the area. So it's a spectrum of actors in the region. But the trajectory of where things are going with like the new Trump regime, and especially after what happened in Syria, if they're ready to give a body like HTS and try to polish them as legitimate rulers and everything, then you can only imagine like what they would accept as far as Sudan when it comes to regionally and convincing internationally. Because again, the West is looking at Sudan through a proxy lens, through the lens of their allies in the region, which include pretty much all of the above, maybe with the exception of Iran, but from Turkey, UAE, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, these are all kind of like the normalization, as Netanyahu put in his map, like the blessings countries. So they're actually like giving them complete control over what happens in Sudan. And the problem is now that the conflict is actually spreading, now there's like more of a sense of like, okay, the question mark of will they go ahead with this, theocratic and military and militia rule and, still siphon off the resources regardless of what happens? Or will this spiral out into something that's not even controllable by them and hurt their interests as well?
Well, on that point, Mosaab, you mentioned it in your first answer. South Sudan now becoming more deeply embroiled in this in the context of their own divisions. There's a lot there, so I don't want to ask you in just several minutes to break down everything in South Sudan. But if you could give people a sense of the general scene there and how it's playing into the broader war in Sudan.
So, South Sudan has been severely affected by the Sudan war. Other than the high levels of displacement, there were like millions of South Sudanese already in Sudan. A small number of them, like, were even like recruited into the RSF and everything. The main effect on South Sudan was the oil, because all of the oil pipelines from South Sudan flow through Sudan and out to Port Sudan on the Red Sea. So they're completely dependent on, that oil flowing. It's like more than 90% of the government's income in South Sudan is coming from this oil revenue. So months ago, like in last year, South Sudan, since the beginning of the war, they've been kind of talking to both sides. Like, guys, let's just, stop the fighting, let the oil flow. We'll mediate. We'll do anything to kind of, help bring the war to an end. But that didn't work. And then the oil stopped flowing. So since last year, South Sudan has been pretty secretive about like when exactly it stopped or how much of it is actually flowing through. But it's clear, like at least in the last 6 months or so, that the oil stopped flowing. And South Sudan's been, experiencing turmoil ever since. Because the main problem internally with South Sudan is, instead of having reform after the 2018 peace deal, it became a situation where the central government would try to buy off the opposition and accommodate them, and basically another power sharing deal, but it always expands, like, different militias picking up arms in different parts of South Sudan. So an extremely volatile country that hasn't really seen a lot of peace like since its independence. So, and the other thing, there were supposed to be elections last year, and the president Salva Kiir, he canceled the elections, and that kind of made the other groups, pretty, worried that, okay, is he going to rule indefinitely and then hand off power to one of his allies instead of having elections and, giving a chance for other groups. So there's an accumulation of issues in South Sudan that led to this flare up right now in Upper Nile State. And the South Sudan government is accusing the Burhan and the SAF government of actually supporting the opposition that's at war right now with the central government. So, and the South Sudan is on the edge right now. Like, the people of South Sudan are very worried about another war breaking out. And it's actually, if that breaks out, we've already seen, for example, Uganda step into the fray and, like claiming that they have forces in South Sudan and that they will protect Kiev and Juba. So you can see now, and this is not even to talk about like the threats from the Burhan Saf regime to Chad. This is not to mention the potential flare up between Eritrea and Ethiopia again. So the more this kind of goes forward, the more we're looking at a possible regional war that's happening, and in all directions. Like, it's going to be very hard to contain. So it's really a question mark at this point.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Well, a lot to cover and a lot to keep following. And as always, we are very, very happy to have you with us to help sort through it all. Mosaab Baba, researcher on Sudan. As always, thanks so much for giving us some of your time here in the Freedom Side.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.